There's a passage in Luke chapter 5 where a guy came to hear Jesus talk, and his name is Levi or Matthew, same guy. And when Jesus saw him, he challenged him to leave everything and to follow him, which he did. And sometime later, Matthew threw a party at his home with all of his old tax-gathering friends. He invited Jesus and the disciples to come. And the way I understand the passage, the idea was that Matthew hoped that at the party there would be some conversations with his friends who were far from God, and then Jesus and the disciples, and maybe a spark would be ignited and maybe a seed would be planted. But in the mix of a party atmosphere, maybe something spiritual would ignite and something good would come out of it. Well, I've been teaching this and practicing this for years, and I throw Matthew parties at my home with people from my community quite regularly. I think who you invite to a Matthew party is very critical. It takes a little bit of emotional intelligence to decide who around the table would be good with so-and-so and so-and-so. If you live on a cul-de-sac, it might be that 4 out of the 8 homes around the wider cul-de-sac are filled with the kinds of people who would better be together with each other than necessarily inviting the whole cul-de-sac. You have to just think through life stage, age, life experience, and figure out, all right, who would probably do well together and enjoy meeting each other. And who you invite on the Christ follower side is even more important. And my general rule of thumb is you need to have a 3-to-1 or a 5-to-1 ratio of people far from God to the Christians. The Christians always need to be outnumbered in the group, because if the balance ever goes the other way, then the folks who are apart from faith start to go, oh, wait a minute, we got a gang tackle going here. I think for the average Christ follower, if you want to get in the game, if you want to see your evangelistic energies released, throw a Matthew party. I was sitting on the rail of a sailboat in a sailboat race and getting to know this new crew that we had put together for our racing team. And when the guy next to me on the rail said that his name was Jim Glass, I laughed and I said, well, I went to school, 20-some years ago, 25 years ago, with a Jim Glass in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And he said, what's your name? And I told him my name, and we kind of rediscovered each other 25 years later. He asked me what I did for a living, and I told him I was the pastor of a church, and he just shut down immediately. I knew right then that our faith journeys had gone opposite directions.
Bill and I were raised very similarly. I know his roots. I lived those roots. I went to school and to chapel every day and twice on Sunday and catechism, and I didn't like it. And I rebelled against it. But it was force-fed. It drove me away from the church.
After we were racing together for probably 2 or 3 years, one night on a Friday night, Jim called me and he said, I have these Friday night gatherings at my house and wonder if you'd like to come. I said, well, what are they?
They're dinner get-togethers with a bunch of friends and guests. And they're very informal, they're fun, and they're very relaxed.
And that was the first time that I saw any kind of personal warmth from Jim, any receptivity to me despite the fact that I was a Christian.
And I always make a point of asking people to bring something, and if it's somebody new and they participate in the process, they feel more relaxed when they come in.
And so I went over to one of these Friday night gatherings, and what a ball these things were. The difference in the kinds of Matthew parties that I throw and in the kind of gatherings that I've been talking about at Jim's house is that these parties were made up exclusively of people far from God, and there was no seed sower in the mix. There was just no one to try to ignite any spiritual conversation, And that's probably the role that God had in mind for me to play.
I think there was a certain amount of reluctance of people who were the regulars at the time because now we have a preacher amongst us.
The conversation around the table was just raucous. And at the end, everybody pitched in and cleaned everything up, and it seemed sort of like you would experience with an extended family situation.
Everyone has to participate in the process. People take ownership of it and feel much more relaxed very quickly.
There was just a warmth, an openness, and I was quite captivated by the whole thing. I don't recall if it was the first Friday night at Jim's where Jim asked me to say a prayer, but it was one of the early ones. So I'll never forget this. He was sitting at the front of the table, probably 15 people at the group that Friday night. And Jim said, "Could I have your attention, please? My friend Bill is gonna say a prayer." And people were so shocked that Jim would tolerate a prayer, let alone announce it.
When we were growing up, we would have dinner, and then my father would open with prayer, and usually it was a very lengthy prayer with lots of these and thous.
And I realized that was going to be an important prayer. This was a time for me to talk to God conversationally in a way that could maybe enfold the people around the table.
Bill has a wonderful down-to-earth way of praying that uses everyday words instead of the ones that I grew up with.
When I said amen, it was totally different feeling around the table.
That's what we were missing prior to Bill being part of the group. It has a magical way of being able to guide or start the conversation off in a new way. It's powerful.
I remember one night after the prayer, the conversation came to a bit of a lull. And I said, what would it be like if each of us just took a minute or two and revealed to each other kind of the highest high that we had in the last 7 days? And it can be anything, the highest high and the lowest low. And someone jumped right in and said, well, I got high this week. And I thought, oh man, that's not how I thought this exercise was gonna go. But then he talked about it, and other people engaged in the conversation, and I thought, okay. And then he talked about his lowest low. The next person jumped right in, and we went all the way around the table. It was very meaningful.
We would talk about Cleo's dates or something, and if she had a good week, and we'd get excited about that.
And the following week, after I said the prayer, someone said, are we going to do the highs and lows again? Because I've been thinking about it all week, and I had a couple great things happen. So that became a pattern for a long time, until it wasn't even necessary to do the exercise anymore, because most of the people in the group came to the group looking forward to catching up with each other and quite naturally talking about their highs and lows. Probably 3 or 4 months into this gathering, when I started to attend, there was a woman in the group who had a breakup with a guy that she had been with for 13 years. And I could tell the minute she sat down at the table that night after the prayer that she had something massive on her mind and heart. And when we got to the low, she just unloaded and probably talked for 45 minutes about her heartbreak and this whole thing. The love that was extended to her around that table, this was just, again, a kind of family, raw, we're in it with you, our hearts break for you. And I remember that night thinking, man, this is a special group. With hearts like these, something good is going to happen in this group over time.
It's certainly a much more positive message, and one that relates to me much more than the one that I had grown up with.
Jim and I have a very interesting friendship, and I came to a point pretty early on where I had to say to God in my private times with him, I'm not going to turn Jim into a project.
We have developed a friendship where I trust him.
one night after Jim had experienced kind of a disappointment in his life. I spent some time on the boat with him after the other guys left, and I gave expression to that. I said, Jim, you know, I'm always going to pray that you'll open the door of your heart to the love of God. I can't not, because I think in the long haul that would be a blessing in your life. I think it would really offer something great for you. But I want you to know, if you decide to never open that door, it's never going to affect our friendship.
I'm much more relaxed about it, and I don't feel like that there is an agenda by Bill being there, but it does open for freewheeling discussion of things that are spiritual.
I think something that's hard for Christians to offer people far from God is a kind of radical inclusiveness. Sometimes we feel like we have to be sort of lifestyle referees for people. And if someone drinks a little too much, if someone gets carried away at a party or misbehaves a little bit, something in us rises up and feels like we got to straighten them out. And that gets misunderstood quite a bit by people who are a little far from God. And in their minds, they're saying, this is just who I am. Why, if you're such a spiritual person, why can't you offer a kind of open-hearted acceptance to me? Why are you trying to fix me and change me and straighten me out? I like where I am, see. My deal is I will err on the side of radical acceptance as opposed to the refereeing thing. And I'll stand accountable before God someday. I don't know if I'm getting it all right, but I'm going to err on the side of grace giving, that's for sure.
I came from a Dutch Christian Reformed upbringing. We were family oriented, but it was just the family. I can't recall ever having the freedom to bring over a neighborhood kid with me. And I really enjoy having people around. And I really enjoy making people feel at ease and building new relationships. Being in this group has really softened my heart a great deal. And it may end up in a point where I make the commitment. Without what we've done, I would never have taken the first step.